It's that time of year again. It's time to put my Formula One knowledge on the line. We have the 2022 grid finally signed, sealed and delivered for this season. I'm sure there won't be too many changes that happen over the course of the year, although it's Formula One and we never know. So it's time for me to put these guys in order from best to worst, with Bahrain just a couple of days away. I've toiled with it. I've changed my mind 100 times, and I'm sure you have your thoughts. So leave them in the comments down below. Let's start in 20th place with Zhou Guanyu. And he is coming into Formula One at a bit of a turbulent time. Obviously, with the new regulations coming in, we don't know what the teams are really going to look like when it comes to the first race of the season. He's the only rookie on the grid, and he's coming into an Alfa Romeo team that look a little bit in turmoil. They didn't have a great testing. They made up for it a little bit in the second round of testing, but I think it's still going to be a struggle for Alfa Romeo at times this season. And coming into Formula One at this time, I've slotted him in 20th place. Now, controversy starts. In 19th place, I've got Lance Stroll. I think he is just not as good as people really give him credit for at times. I know he's not as bad as some people say either. I know he gets that stigma as a pay driver, but some people also use that as a positive and try and say that actually he's gotten rid of that tag now and he's much, much better than people give him credit for. I think he sits somewhere in between. I think he's a very good middling driver on the grid, but I think Aston Martin will struggle this year. And similarly, I've put Sebastian Vettel in 18th place because I think both Aston Martin drivers will have turmoil and troubles over the course of the season. If you just look at the Aston Martin car, it almost confuses me, the Aston Martin car, because they're Mercedes powered. You'd expect them to look similar to the Williams car or the McLaren car or the Mercedes car even. Like, you can see the parallels between those three, and then Aston Martin's car is just completely different to those guys. And either they've struck something incredibly good, or what I think is they're really going to struggle this season to find that balance in the team. Also, we're looking at Aston Martin for 2025, aren't we? 2026. They are not going to be competing for World Drivers' Championships this year or even next year. And I think this year they could struggle. In 17th place, Valtteri Bottas in the other Alfa Romeo. As I said, I think Alfa Romeo struggled. They didn't get a lot done in that first testing, but I think Bottas's quality will really shine through. We look back at him at Mercedes and lots of people say he was a bit of a failure. He never really put Hamilton under pressure, but he still managed to pick up wins. He still managed to show that he is an incredibly consistent driver. He comes into that team with his experience, with the Ferrari engine in the Alfa Romeo as well this season, and Alfa Romeo will improve over the course of the season, I'm sure, with him at the helm to direct them in where they want to go. I think he'll do much better than some people are giving him credit for. Just in front of Bottas, I've stuck Nicholas Latifi in the Williams. I think Williams will take a step forward. Obviously, they weren't dead last year, which was quite nice to see them take a couple of steps up. Got a podium under their belt, and now they're looking to push on from that. Obviously, losing their talisman, George Russell, is going to be tricky, but Nicholas Latifi's been with the team now. It's his third year in Formula One. We generally see a little bit of an uptick in form for drivers in their third year. Think back to Lando Norris and George Russell last year. We just saw a huge uptick in form from them. I think we could see a similar sort of thing from Latifi, and that will drag that Williams car up just into 16th place. In front of him, though, I've got a driver in his second season in Formula One. It's Mick Schumacher in the Haas. Now, I am all aboard the Haas hype train. I think Haas have done an incredible job over the course of the off-season. Obviously, they basically threw 2021 out of the window and put all of their time and effort and money into 2022. And with that, they are also working closer with Ferrari, and I'll get to Ferrari obviously later on in the video, but I think that link between them and Ferrari will massively help them this year. And the fact that Schumacher's coming into his second season, he's got a much better teammate now, the much better dynamic within that team. I think he'll improve massively, and that's why I've jumped him up into 15th place. I've chucked another driver coming into Formula One in 14th place, and now Albon has a point to prove. I love the fact that Williams have picked up Alex Albon. I think he's a great replacement for George Russell, and I think he will come into this with the bit between his teeth. Obviously, it's a little bit weird. He's still got the connections with Red Bull. He's in a Mercedes-powered team. How much influence that will have over the course of the season, I don't think too much, but it's something to keep in mind. but I do think he will outperform Nicholas Latifi and show his quality. He's going to come in. He needs to show that he is worthy of that place up at the top of the grid again. Obviously, got that opportunity in the Red Bull, then got dropped out of the team. He wants to make it back into that Red Bull team as soon as possible, I would imagine. And therefore, I think this Williams move is a great move for him. And I think he will pick up points, and he's gonna show that quality that we saw, why he got that Red Bull seat in the first place. Just in front of him, though, I've got another driver I don't think ever should have left the Formula 1 grid. It's Kevin Magnussen. I was not expecting him to be back on the grid for the 2022 season after the turmoil that he left Haas with in 2020, but they've gone back to the Dane, and he's back in Formula 1, and I'm very, very excited to see what he can do. Never should have left, and he, again, similar to Albon, is coming back into Formula 1, has a massive point to prove, is coming into a team that has just lost out on their talisman in George Russell in Albon's case. In this case, it's the financial benefit that came with Nikita Mazepin. So he's got to give them something. He's got to improve that team, and I think he's the perfect driver to come in and do something for them. Just incredible to see him back, and I hope he can do really, really well. I am well on the Haas hype train for this season. Similar to the hype train of last year with Yuki Tsunoda. Everybody was talking about Yuki Tsunoda at the beginning of 2021. There's a little less talk about him now in 2022, and I think that will do him some good. I've slotted him in 12th place, and he's shown how difficult it can be to make that step up into Formula 1. He was fast-tracked through Formula 3, Formula 2, straight into Formula 1. Only 1 year in each season before that, and he never really had the time to settle with the team, understand what was expected from him. But now he's got that in Formula 1. Drive to Survive, I know some people don't like, but gave a really good insight into Yuki Tsunoda's season and how that developed over the course of the year. With AlphaTauri being in the midfield as well, I think we could see some proper Yuki Tsunoda drives, and why he got that fast track into Formula 1 ahead of some of the other Red Bull juniors, because they are absolutely stacked with talent. Just summarising the bottom 10 then. Ocon in 11th place. And I was sort of 50-50 on this. And I can tell you that Alonso is also in at 10th place. And basically, I didn't really know where to put Alpine. Alpine is such a weird team dynamic to try and get right. Obviously, they've had lots of change over the off-season as well. And I didn't know where to put Alpine. It's a bit weird because they're such a bespoke car. Obviously, nobody else has that Renault Alpine engine. They're the only manufacturer on the grid with that, and therefore that could either work massively in their favour or could work massively against them. And because they have their own engine, they're also going to have their own designs and own sort of thought processes and the best way of getting the most out of that chassis and engine for themselves. So you can't really compare Alpine's design to anybody else because they're trying to get the best out of something completely different to everybody else on the grid, which is kind of a weird dynamic to put them in. So I've slotted Ocon in at 11th place. I think Alonso will outperform his teammate. I know Alonso is getting towards the end of his career for the second time, but we hopefully will see a bit of a dynamic change in Alpine. I think even though Alonso will outscore Ocon, I think we'll hopefully see those performances from Ocon like we did last year. He massively improved, obviously got his first win in Formula 1, was very, very close to another podium as well, just pipped at the line by Valtteri Bottas. And Alonso, this is kind of his swan song. This is either going to be his last season or his penultimate season in Formula 1, you'd imagine, with Piastri knocking on the door every single race to try and get a seat in that Alpine. So I've put Alpine in the middle, but they could very much jump up or jump down in my list. And that sort of summarises the midfield. And the top of the midfield is, of course, this man, Pierre Gasly. I think Pierre Gasly has shown he is the best midfield driver that there is. I think over the last 3 seasons, we have seen Gasly go from Red Bull reject to one of the best drivers on the grid. And he shows it week in, week out. And if he ever needed to show it for one more season, it is this season, because he has the opportunity now. His contract is up at the end of the year. He's going to be moving on to a new team, I would imagine. So if he can get a really, really solid finish and finish that top of the midfield pack in those midfield cars, he is really putting himself in and amongst the pigeons to try and get a seat back at Red Bull, maybe take the Ricciardo seat in McLaren if that becomes available. If Lewis Hamilton retires, can he take that seat in Mercedes? I think that would be an exceptional move for Mercedes to try and pick up someone like a Pierre Gasly. And I think he's going to not easily finish the top of this midfield pack, but show his quality, show that he and AlphaTauri are just such a good dynamic together, and that he is a wonderful team player for AlphaTauri as well. He will pick up that 9th place slot. So we're going into the 4 big boys now, and we're going towards the top of the tree. In 8th place, Daniel Ricciardo. I think he's going to struggle. Obviously missed out on the testing because of COVID-19. Had a really poor season last year. I know that he has had better second seasons when we've seen him move to places like Renault in the past, but Lando Norris for me was just so much better than Daniel Ricciardo last year. And even with his experience, even with his understanding now of the car and the team and the dynamic around him, I think he's still going to struggle compared to these 7 drivers that I've got in front of him, because I think Daniel Ricciardo might be on the way out. And it's sad to say, he's one of my favourite drivers on the grid. Second season syndrome might come into play. He might do a little bit better than this, but I just think this might be the sort of ending of Daniel Ricciardo. Not saying that he's going to leave at the end of this year, but maybe it's time to sort of start slowing down and dropping down the grid. I think, Ricciardo being a World Drivers' Champion is out of the question now, in my opinion. Unlike his teammate Lando Norris, who I've put in 7th place. I think he'll beat Ricciardo again. I think McLaren are in a weird situation where they could kind of get nowhere near the top 3, but also not be drawn into that midfield pack. I think 4th place in the Constructors' Championship is pretty solidly theirs for this year. They've had struggles. They've also had incredible testing periods. Like the first testing, Barcelona, you'd say they were probably the best looking team after Barcelona testing. And then Bahrain, it kind of went from bad to worse. Daniel Ricciardo missing out. They're having brake problem issues. Lando Norris not being able to put in as many laps as they would have hoped because they only had 1 driver rather than 2. It was very, very tricky for McLaren. They're still in a point of transition. Obviously, we're looking at this McLaren team that was dead and buried 5 years ago. They were really struggling and horribly performing 5 years ago. They're still on that recovery path, in my opinion. And as a McLaren fan, I wish I could say, Lando Norris is going to be a World Drivers' Champion this year. But I think there's still a couple more years and a couple more years of development that they need to really push right up to the top of the grid. Getting into my top 3 then, and the top 6 drivers. I've got George Russell in at 6th place. This is controversial, and I've changed my mind on this a few times, to be honest with you. I've changed my mind maybe 3 or 4 times. I've had George Russell as high as 2nd. I've had George Russell as low as 8th. And I've settled in at 6th place. I think he is going to struggle. I think there's going to be an adjustment period. I know we've seen him in a Mercedes before. We've seen him at Bahrain in a Mercedes before, and he performed exceptionally well and probably should have won that race had it not been for a puncture. But this is over the course of a season. This is over the course of 20 plus races that he is going to have to take part in. He's going to be in a brand new car with a brand new team, understanding Formula One in a slightly different way. Yes, I think his qualifying pace is exceptional. We haven't really seen his dynamic in terms of can he battle right at the front, apart from that one-off race, which again, is not quite the same as a 20, 22, 23 race season. So it's going to be a bit of a weird one for George Russell. I've slotted him in 6th place, but I think we are going to see him pick up podiums. I think we're going to see him pick up his first win in Formula One. It's just going to have a few races in there that are maybe a little bit trickier. In front of him, the Mexican Sergio Perez. I think Red Bull have to back Sergio Perez. He has been the perfect foil for Max Verstappen. He basically won Max Verstappen that World Championship last year. I know we can talk about the safety car, so on and so forth, but the drive from Perez in that final race of the season was sublime. It was one of the best defensive performances you will ever see in Formula One. He just had that tenacity, had that ability to get everything out of that car, and did it exceptionally well. I think Sergio Perez is going to improve. I think we'll see him win a race again. I think he'll add to that tallies of podiums that he's got also, but I don't think he'll be right up there with the big boys at the front. As much as I'd love to maybe see Sergio Perez battle for a title, I don't think we're ever going to quite see that in Formula One. Lewis Hamilton takes 4th place for me, and again, There's going to be some talk in the comments about this, I'm sure. Lots of people saying Lewis Hamilton could go on and win the World Drivers' Championship. I think that is absolutely fair enough because Mercedes just have been this tyrant, this turmoil of Formula One where Mercedes have just been dominant for so long, and those dominations do have to come to an end. And I think this transitional period between 2021 and 2022 could be the end of that Mercedes dominance. You know, if we look back, if you'd have asked in the early 2000s about Michael Schumacher and Ferrari, people have been like, oh, Ferrari are just going to win every championship ever for the rest of time. If you'd have asked about Sebastian Vettel in a Red Bull, people, similar sort of thing. Sebastian Vettel just looks like he's going to win championship after championship after championship, and it's never, ever going to end. We've finally seen an end to Lewis Hamilton's dominance last year with Max Verstappen winning the championship in the final race of the season. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton is going to come back with a vengeance this year. He's going to want to fight for every single point possible. But the Mercedes car and the Mercedes getting used to these new regulations, I think might be just that turning point where we do see a couple of other teams catch up to them a little bit and even push beyond them just slightly. In third place, I've got Carlos Sainz. I was so close to putting Carlos Sainz in second place in this list. I think he's well and truly one of the best drivers on the grid. I think he's shown last year, he went from being incredibly underrated, in my opinion, when he was at McLaren. Lots of people not really giving Carlos Sainz the credit that he deserved for taking McLaren to the places that he did and being a really linchpin point in McLaren, going from that team that was just absolutely nowhere in the championship to really pushing for podiums and wins and just getting to that point where McLaren could win a race again with Daniel Ricciardo last year. I think he owes a lot of that win to Carlos Sainz and the work that he did with the team. He's a wonderful driver. Last year, he showed his quality. He showed that he is that driver that can just be on the fringe, just be on the edge, and then someone makes a mistake and he's there to take advantage of that. He picked up those podiums where other drivers had made mistakes, where maybe, you know, your Max Verstappen's, Lewis Hamilton's didn't finish the race. It was Carlos Sainz just behind who was able to snatch up that podium position. And I think we'll see that again this year. I think we'll see him on the podium a lot more frequently, but I do think he has that ability to just pick up on the mistakes of other drivers and put himself into that position where he is the one gaining from others' mistakes. Second place in the championship. Obviously, we've got Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc left. I've put Max Verstappen, our current world champion in the Red Bull, in second place. And for me, I think this is just Red Bull might start the season just that tiny little bit slower. They put a lot of effort into 2021 and winning that championship, and it was incredible to see his first ever world championship win in such incredible style in one of the best Formula One seasons that we're ever going to see in our lifetimes. He is absolutely phenomenal in terms of his driving ability, and bar no one else, I don't think, like, he is just, I can't even put into words how good I think Max Verstappen was towards the end of last season, and his ability to win that World Drivers' Championship was phenomenal. I just think Red Bull might start a little bit slow, and that will cost Max Verstappen. We know how close these championships can be right at the death. It literally came down to the final race of the season last year. I think it could come down to that again this year, and Max Verstappen will just miss out to Mr. Charles Leclerc, another new World Drivers' Champion. I think he's ready. He's one of the most unlucky drivers on the grid. I think you could argue, you know, last year he picked up 2 pole positions, couldn't convert either of those into wins because of the Ferrari just not being quite there yet. He also was leading the race in Silverstone for the longest of times. He was obviously looking back at 2020, had a similar sort of luck. 2019 in Bahrain, where we're now heading, he was winning that race for so long, and then the Ferrari's engine gave up. Like, he's been incredibly unlucky over the course of his career, and I think that unluckiness is built up enough to where he finally deserves to be repaid that tiny little bit, and I think he will end up being the World Drivers' Champion. So this is my 20, from 1st to 20th, and, you know, in 6-7 months' time, we're probably going to be looking at this and thinking I was absolutely insane. But we have to wait and see. I'd love to know your 20s in the comments down below. Obviously, with that, I've kind of made a little bit of a change to my constructors predictions too. I've got Ferrari at the top, McLaren in at 4th place, as I said, Alpine, AlphaTauri, Haas, Williams. I think is going to be a really close dynamic between those 4 teams. I think Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo might struggle just that little bit more at the bottom. But that's just my thoughts, my predictions, and I'm sure things are going to change over the course of the season. But I'd love to know what you think. Leave a like down below as well. Subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I'll see you next time.